Right, we are recording now, and I've just put on the text. Now, as you find, therefore, Foe Crusher, at this point of time, when he has Livestrong in its midst and he is not yet decided what to do with him, he decides to talk with his counselors. And just as, Cloudy has his group of counselors, Foe Crusher has his own group of 5 counselors who provide different opinions to him. And the first person he turns to is Red Eye, or Roktakko, as you will find in the Bengali and the Sanskrit translation. Now, Red Eye's immediate advice to the king is that you kill this crow, because the enemy, under no circumstances, is going to be acceptable, or the enemy is under no circumstances to be entertained. Therefore, kill a weakling lest he grow hard to smite. Later, with augmented power, he will fight. And he who will not, when he may, when he will, he shall have nay. And therefore comes the first tale, which suggests that age-old enmity can never be resolved. Right? Therefore, that once a bond of friendship is broken, it can never be reconciled in the exact way. And therefore comes the first story of this group, which is told by Red Eye. Now, notice how many tales are told by Red Eye here. Just as Livestrong had the bulk of the tales in the earlier group of narratives, similarly, you see, Red Eye is the focus of this group in the sense that he has the maximum number of tales to tell. And this is about the snake who gave a coin to the Brahmin because the Brahmin had took a pail of milk to him every single day. Now, obviously, many of you will wonder why. You see, the Brahmin is the figure who comes recurrently back from human society within the world of the animals. And it once again points out the preeminence of the caste system and the eminence of the Brahmins within it, that they are the real focus, as it were, in the human world of the Panchatantra. So the hierarchy of the caste is a constant presence in the Panchatantra, as it were. The Brahmin is supposedly the elite within society. You will find other, characters, for example, the carpenter and so on and so forth, but they're largely uneducated. So in a certain way, some of the prejudices of the Indian caste system is evident in the Panchatantra as well. Now, therefore, he worships the snake with milk in the anthill, and he pays his respect. But the Brahmin's son is greedy. Now, the theme of this particular tale, apart from the fact that one's enemies are never reconciled fully, is avarice and greed. And avarice and greed are running themes within Panchatantra. You will here, let me just point out that within Christianity, as well as Islam, as well as the Hindu religion, there are the concepts of the 7 deadly sins and the cardinal virtues, right? This was propounded by Aristotle's father, Nicomachus, and therefore, in the classical system, at least, it was called the Nicomachean ethics. And you had within the Christian framework the 7 deadly sins, of which the most important deadly sin was avarice, the most prevalent sin, avarice. Avarice is greed. Therefore, the son actually wants all the dinars to himself, and he kills the snake off all at once so that he can break the anthill and get the dinar. And the Brahmin sort of returns and finds the son dead and molds him. But then comes an inset narrative of the Brahmin recounting his own tale. So it's very strange, isn't it, that the Brahmin, in a moment where his son is dead, is actually telling another tale. Now, you will remember that within Panchatantra, of course, there are emotions. So we can take a look at Panchatantra through logic, through the concept of politics, through the logic of behavior. But we can also take another way of looking at Panchatantra is looking at the emotions of the Panchatantra. And in this particular tale, the Brahmin seems to be more inclined towards giving advice than mourning the death of his son. So his tale, the Brahmin's tale, within the tale of Red Eye, is the tale of generosity, of the need for generosity, and how the swans actually were forced, the golden swans were forced from their place of residence because they refused to accommodate another bird. And this is the story of the unsocial swans. So this tale, particular tale, told by the Brahmin to the other listeners, the theme is that of generosity. Quite ironic, isn't it? Because Red Eye, who is telling the greater narrative, says, don't be generous to the enemy. Don't be generous. Kill him at one go. And the Brahmin, incidentally, is talking about generosity to with the swans. And therefore, the swans are not generous. And therefore, the king drives them off from their residential place because they refuse to accommodate another golden bird. Right. And therefore, the snake is called once again by the Brahmin and says, let us forget our enmity. And the snake gives this message: the lighted funeral pile you may break up and fling apart, but love, when torn and patched again, lives in an aching heart. So the breach, B-R-E-A-C-H, the breach is never quite mended, right? Therefore, Red Eye says, you can never reconcile the crows and the owls. The crow is our enemy. He is weak. At this point, let us be ruthless. Now, you will find that within Red Eye, there is a very, very fierce practical logic of warfare. Red Eye is, as the name suggests, a great advocate of war and violence and survival, right? But the world of the Panchatantra, as I have already discussed with you, is replete with this violence. And in certain cases, the animal world is an index of the human violence, or the human world and the animal world are linked by this, fight for survival. And what is a fight for survival in the animal world is actually a battle for survival in the political world of the Panchatantra, as it were, of the human world of the Panchatantra. And then, of course, the king asks Fierce Eye. And Fierce Eye says that, you should always, he's a guest, he's a supplicant, he's asking for your mercy. And therefore, the theme of this text is mercy and thereby hospitality. Mercy and hospitality. Now, remember that in the Indian tradition, you have the saying Atithi Devo Bhava, in the sense that the guest is the god. And therefore, any amount of sacrifice for your guest needs to be made, and one should never kill your supplicant. And then comes his tale of mercy, hospitality, and generosity. But this is an interesting text. This text of the self-sacrificing dove. The dove who has this hunter who comes to his home. The hunter, incidentally, has caught his own wife, right? I would say the dove's wife. And the dove says that, I can't, and the hunter is very cold. So the hunter asks for shelter and the dove cannot give him warmth. And he lights a fire and plunges into him because he wants to feed the hunter. And the hunter is so impressed, is so moved by the dove's gesture that he releases, he he leaves his hunting, releases the wife of the dove, and the female dove, in grief for the husband, actually sort of jumps into the fire and self-immolates herself. The hunter is even more moved, and he leaves his hunting, gives up his passions, and gradually enters the forest, becomes a mendicant, and he himself also gives up his life. Now, why do I say that this tale is significant? There are two reasons. One is very simple, that this is a tale which is told entirely in verse. One of the very few tales of the Panchatantra which are entirely in verse. Secondly, this tale does not talk about politics at all. It is about self-sacrifice. It is a tale which is devoid of any political ambition and totally dedicated to emotions. Thirdly, this tale incidentally talks about domesticity also, and this concept of how, the relationship between the husband and the wife is a very tender tale, where without the wife, the husband acknowledges that the home is just a spot, is just a physical location, right? So he says, when she's not at home, home is an empty spot. So in a certain sense, you see, apart from the political, all the other texts are more or less political. This is a text that offers us into a glimpse into the domestic world, the intimacy between the husband and the wife, the concept of the family, right? So this is a different tale, which is domestic in one sense, which offers us a glimpse into the emotions, and it also talks about this conjugal sort of love between the husband and the wives. So he says, some wives their life's devotion give, and for the husband's life. Now, obviously, the dove, the female dove, says that lest woman should be burned entire, while whose husband is not satisfied. So this is a tale that also is extremely patriarchal in the sense. And patriarchal, what is patriarchy? Patriarchy is the institution which believes that the man is, or it is in the man that is at the center of the world, and the woman is just marginal to him, that there is all power within the masculine, and there's very little power within the female. Now, please remember that patriarchy is not restricted to men alone. Women who also believe in the same thing are part of the patriarchal ideology, right? So if you say that, the man is at the center of the house and the wife is just an adjunct, and that the man should go out and the wife should, or the woman should stay indoors. If a woman says that, even she is within patriarchy. And if a man says the reverse, then he is resisting patriarchy. So patriarchy is a kind of ideology, a kind of system. Ideology is a system of belief. And therefore, the world of the Panchatantra, as you can quite clearly see, is a very deeply patriarchal world of ancient Hindu society, where the man is at the center of the universe. And the wife, very, very interestingly, once the man has surrendered and to fire, the wife also self-immolates herself. So thereby glimpsing into the practice of sati, maybe, that existed within Hindu society, and the theme of self-immolation once the husband has died. So in a way, this text suddenly departs from the political of the other halves of the Panchatantra, and suddenly gives us a glimpse into the intimate life of husband and wife, the world of emotions, the world of patriarchy, and the final sacrifice that they make. This is the text of sacrifice, incidentally, very unlike the texts of greed, avarice, survival that exists in the Panchatantra. So I wanted to draw your attention to this tale. And this also is a tale of transformation, in the sense that the hunter is transformed from a cruel, selfish individual to a far more accommodating, he's released, as it were, from these worldly cares. So a tale which transforms the listener as well. And therefore, is it because of this? Is it because it has this emotional quality that this tale is narrated completely in verse? Right. So he says, cold and wind and heat I will embrace. This is the hunter. Grow thin and dirty, form and face. Seek virtue perfect and alone. And therefore, he sacrifices himself to his body, wears a heavenly gown and heavenly gems hang pendant down. So the ultimate moral, therefore, is mercy for the person who has taken shelter with you, mercy to the guest. And then comes the turn of Flame Eye, and Flame Eye suggests that, you could have some benefit from this old crow as well. And he tells the story of the old man with the young wife, right? So, thank you, benefactor, take what you like the best. Therefore, this is the story of the old man who marries a young wife. And this is interesting, not because merely of the advice that is given, but also because this is one tale which talks about age. The Panchatantra is also a repository of wisdom and experience. Remember, that it talks about the different stages of man. And this is the tale which talks about the sorry state of old age, right? Slow tottering steps, the strength exhausts, the eye unsteady blinks, from driveling mouth the teeth are lost, the handsome figure shrinks. So when I talk about the Panchatantra as a political text, I need to also acknowledge before you that it is a text that talks about all kinds of human existence. And this is one which gives us a glimpse into the fear of old age and death. And of course, there's this thief who comes into the room, and the wife passionately clings on to the old man, right? And therefore, he says, you take whatever you want. And the thief makes reply, nothing here that I should like, should I want a thing. I'll return if she does not passionately cling. And it is in this way that the intruder becomes a benefactor, right? Therefore, he says, who knows? Flame Eye says, who knows? Someday, this intruder might be your benefactor. This crow might lead to our benefit. And therefore, having been maltreated by them, he will labor for our success or the revelation of their vulnerable point. He should not be killed. And then he goes to Hook Nose. And Hook Nose says he should not be killed. And he says, if you have enemies who have discord, then you are the one benefited. And the tale is of the Brahmin and the thief and the ghost. The thief wants to steal the cows of the Brahmin. The ghost wants to kill the Brahmin and eat him. And they quarrel amongst themselves, and this wakes up the Brahmin, and the Brahmin resists them, leading to both of them losing their their cows and the body of the Brahmin, right? So when the Brahmin heard this, he stood up and took a good look. He saved his life from the ghost and saved his cows from the thief, right? So he says, from enemies who are in discord, you can have relief. So the moral of the story is keep him, because he is the enemy's enemy and therefore our friend, right? And the king then asks Warrior, and Warrior comes up with the story of mutual give and take. Rather than go into conflict, he says, you have mutual give and take. And this is the story of the snake in the prince's belly. The prince becomes weak. he's cast off, and he's married off to the younger daughter of another king. And this younger daughter, she notices this snake coming out of the young man's belly and fighting with another snake. And both of them reveal, this snake reveals how he can be killed, the other snake reveals how the pot of gold can be found, and therefore the woman then kills both the snakes and gets the gold and the husband's health. So he says, in mutual defense, it is always useful that we can. Okay, so are there network issues here? Okay, you just try and hang on to whatever you can hear. I will, of course, upload this on YouTube, so you might as well, take a look at it later on if you want to. Right. So for the rest of you who can hear me, I am carrying on with this lecture. Right. So is there anybody at all who can hear me? Could you just respond?
Actually, Amrita, we can hear you, but we were not able to see you.
Okay, no problem. I'm not.
Sir, I can see you as well and hear
Right.
you as well.
Fine.
Can
So
also see you,
this
sir.
is probably linked with particular networks. Don't worry, I'm not Shah Rukh Khan, so I'll not be, you'll not miss seeing me, or so just hearing me is enough. And when I upload the recording, you might as well take a look at the video. Right? I'll carry on so that we are not disrupted in class. Right. So then comes this concept of. So all the counselors, apart from Red Eye, have voted to show mercy on Livestrong, and therefore Red Eye is immediately aggrieved, and he says that when honor is withheld or paid mistakenly, it is clear three things have unrestricted course: famine and death and fear. So if you have poor counselors, then a kingdom is ruined. And when decent advice is not listened to, then the three great threats to the kingdom come. What are these three threats? Famine, death, and fear. Right. So, and therefore, the next group of tales. So let me just pause here for a moment. What have we had? We have had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 advisors talking to Foe Crusher. Apart from Red Eye, all of them have argued that the crow should be given shelter. And Red Eye therefore suggests that all of them are advising the king against good sense, and that if this is the case, then you can easily be fooled. So the shrewd, the improper counselor is often defeated by the shrewd enemy. And there is the story of the gullible carpenter. Now, you will find that, very interestingly, you will find that there are a number of tales in this Panchatantra which talk about passion. So I probably have not circulated, or I don't remember, a Bangla version of the Panchatantra for children. Now, there you will not have this story, because a large number of the stories of Panchatantra also deal with calm, desire, passion, sex, right? Betrayal in sex, cuckolding, that is when the husband is betrayed by the wife. Therefore, sexual jealousy, sexuality, passion are all an integral part of Panchatantra. You see, Panchatantra is also about, it's a very adult story, remember, that you all have been given a very watered down, filtered version of the Panchatantra. But apart from, other political aspects, the Panchatantra also deals with sexuality and betrayal in sex. And therefore, this is the story of the gullible carpenter who becomes a cuckold and his wife tricks him. The carpenter, wants to know how his wife is sleeping around with people. So he hides under the bed. The wife tramples upon him and immediately finds out that the carpenter is hiding. Therefore, what she does is she poses that she is sleeping with men because the gods have ordered her to do so. And the carpenter is so taken by this logic that he actually takes the lover on his shoulder and goes from house to house. So this is a story which talks about passion, sexuality, betrayal. And once again, if you look at this, it talks about the passion of the woman, the betrayal of the woman. So in a sense, there is a certain misogyny, misogyny. Misogyny is a hatred for women, a certain mistrust for women that is evident in Panchatantra. Many of the women are seen to be unfaithful, especially within the lower classes. You see, that's the difference between the Brahmin and the carpenter. The carpenter's wife is one who sleeps around, right? And therefore, he says, you too must mount my shoulder. So he takes both the wife and the lover on his shoulder, and everybody laughs at him. So therefore, it argues utter want of sense to pardon obvious offense. So Red Eye says you're making a big mistake here, and that you should never, foolishly pardon those who you should kill, right? And therefore, he says this will bring about our ruin. Cautions them, but they take Livestrong to their own place, and Livestrong interacts with Red Eye. This is one where the two intelligent counselors, and it's interesting in the sense that Red Eye is not old by wisdom or old by experience. He is wise by instinct. And Livestrong, on the other hand, has seen much. He's old, and therefore he has gathered wisdom by experience, right? So there is this caveat, this lesson, this underlying statement that it is not that with age you get wisdom, right? Or experience merely does not lead to wisdom. There's also this notion of discernment and a practical instinct. For Red Eye, instinctively he knows that the crows cannot be trusted, right? And he says, Livestrong says, in my next birth, I want to be an owl. And Red Eye immediately says that that is not possible, that nature will not change. And he tells the story. So this is Red Eye to Livestrong. You see the number of tales that Red Eye has, the wisest among them all, in the sense of owls. And he tells the story of the mouse maid who is made mouse. So the mouse becomes a maid, and then she wants to marry. And then there's the sun whom he says is too hot. The mountain is too big. Therefore, who is greater than the mountain? The mouse who eats at it. And therefore, she decides that she wants to marry the mouse, right? And therefore, there's ultimately this story about that the mouse is, one cannot change one's nature, and the mouse, being mouse made, will always marry a mouse, right? Livestrong, at this point of time, is laughing at himself, and he's giving the lesson that the secrets of diplomacy to him alone, that is Red Eye, were plain, who instant in his master's cause advised that I be slain. So it's a tale here of two sets of counselors. One who counseled wisely, and the other is one who counseled wisely, but whose counsel was not taken, right? So, and then Livestrong is given a home. he says, I don't want to stay within you because obviously they will keep an eye on him. So he stays outside, gathers his strength. And it is at this point of time that another set of tales is told by Red Eye. And this is the tale about the bird with the golden dung. So the bird, as it were, shits gold in the sense. And the hunter brings this bird to the king. But the counselor says, "Oh, king, how can that be? How can a bird shit gold?" And the king says, "Yes, that's true." And they let the bird go. And the bird says that I played the fool at first. I showed him how I shit gold. Then he, who had me on his tether, he gave me away to the king. And then the king and the counselor were equally foolish. So what Red Eye is suggesting is that the court of Forstrong is marked by folly, by fools. And when fools gather, there is only destruction and complete chaos. And therefore, he says, they neglected Red Eye's counsel, sound as it was, and pampered Livestrong. And it is at this point of time that you see that Red Eye decides that he will leave the master, his king, and go because the king has not listened to his advice and is behaving foolishly. Now, here is an interesting moment in the text. We were discussing this concept about monarchy and oligarchy and what is the duty of the king and the subject. The subject's loyalty to the king is unquestioned. So in that case, can Red Eye leave the king? Well, he does not betray the king, but if the king fails to give him protection, then he can sort of renounce the king and go away to a different land. So he comes from, as a wise man, he flees when he sees that he might be destroyed. Now, this is another lesson that the Panchatantra tells us. Strategic retreat. If you know that you are going to be destroyed, do not jump into the fire. Retreat. So Red Eye leaves the king. But these are ethical gray areas. Gray, why? Because in black and white, the subject should never, betray or renounce the king. The subject should not leave the king and go. But Red Eye says, if the king fails to give me protection, then I have the right to depart. There are some areas where the action may not seem to be moral. For example, this entire episode where Livestrong is given refuge and they give him shelter because he has sought refuge. And then he burns their house down. Does he violate the law of the host and the guest? Just as a host has ethical responsibility towards the guest also has to follow the laws of hospitality. So what takes precedence, the law of survival or the law of hospitality? These are some very crucial gray areas that are explored by the Panchatantra, right? And then, of course, Red Eye has this tale that, you should always dread, dangers that come ahead from folly. And he gives the tale of the cave that talked, and this lion who goes into the fox's cave, and the fox sees the lion's footprints and immediately calls out and says, "Cave, you always told me that you were safe. So tell me now." And the lion believes him and says that the cave is safe, and the fox immediately knows and runs away. Right? So joy comes from knowing what to dread. So fear is also important. That to be foolishly fearless is not right. You have this entire proverb, fools rush in where angels fear to tread. So fear is a valid emotion. And fear often leads us into correct and strategic retreat. So a long life through the woods I have walked, but never heard a cave that talked. And at Red Eye's departure, Livestrong is overwhelmed and overjoyed, and he says he was the only far-sighted man, the rest are numbskulls. And then comes that very important line, if no far-sighted counselors long tried secure, aid him, the downfall of a king is swift and sure. So the king is not just, as some of you were asking, just a body in that sense of the term. The king is a composite body. The king is part of the kingdom which survives on the honest and brutally honest opinion of the counselor. So the king and the counselor are, wedded in a certain kind of a bond. There are different kinds of bonds that the Panchatantra talks about. And this, in this particular case, very important bond between the king and his counselors. So the shrewd discover enemies disguised as friends, in senseless counselors whose speech to evil tends. Right, so one of the most important characteristic of the counselor is to discern truth and help the king in finding out the truth. Right. Well, cause your friends no bitter woes, do not fraternize with foes. So he is echoing Red Eye that you cannot fraternize with your foes. Sooner or later, they will bite. Friends when lost are friends no more. Enemies were lost before. So once again, you see, friendship, relationships in Panchatantra are not sacrosanct. Above all the other bonds, there's this bond of the self, the importance of the self. And once the self has been betrayed, there might not be a going back, there might not be recovering. So in a sense, the Panchatantra is not an idealistic text. It does not talk about eternal friendship. It does not talk about perfect relationships. It does not talk about supreme sacrifice, excepting in one or two tales. It rather talks about political strategies of survival, and it prioritizes the survival of the self over everything else. Right? So in that sense, it's a practical manual. It's a manual of practical behavior in daily life. Right? And then, of course, Livestrong builds the woodpile at the fortress gate. And then he says, come on, immediately to action. Once again, quick, swift action is the need of the hour. When speed is needful, never permit delay, but do it pat, else wrathful gods are sure to strike the undertaking flat. So do it quickly. Right. Later, when enemies are slain and when you have returned to our home, I will tell you the whole story in carefree humor. And then Cloudy and his followers burn Red Eye's, Foe Crusher's cave. And you see, once again, you remember the text when it talked about the fortress that had only one entrance and one exit, and therefore they cannot get out through any other gate. Right. So, and then comes another dialogue between Livestrong and Cloudy. Now, you have had, therefore, three sets of narratives. One is between Livestrong and Cloudy. What to do? You had a set of narratives between Foestrong and his counselors about what to do. And once they're destroyed, now there's another set of, concluding kind of tales between Livestrong. The maximum number of tales, therefore, belongs to Livestrong because he has survived and he has destroyed the enemy. Right. So, therefore, he says, how did you pass your time in midst of the enemy? That's the question that is put before Livestrong. And Livestrong here talks about the need for both patience and endurance. Shojjo Shakti ebong dhoirjo. Right? That when you are in adversity, you must have both patience and you must have the capacity to endure. And what is the example that he gives? It's very interesting that he gives the example from the epics, from the Indian epics, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. For example, Rama and 14 years of exile. You have the 14-year Agyatobas of the Pandavas as well. It says that Arjun worked like this, Bhim worked as a cook. Therefore, endurance is an extreme virtue. So, one of the things you could actually do is try and make a list of the virtues and vices. Right? Swiftness is a virtue. Endurance is also a virtue in particular circumstances. Remember that the Panchatantra says that there should not be one particular code of behavior. That's one important lesson that it gives, that according to the situation, you could wait or you could strike. But once you've taken the decision, you must abide by it. Right? So these are the references to the different circumstances. Gigantic Bhima, smoke begrimed, puffing at labor, and a ladle flourished at his feet, was cook in Matsya land. Right? And therefore, Virat's court, Kunti's handsome, powerful twins, high birth writ on their brows were menials, and Draupadi, with youth's matchless beauty seal, haughty maidens called her slave and sneered at her for sport in Matsya's royal court. So once again, we see this is what you will call intertextuality. When one text refers to a pre-existing text, right, and draws a point of reference, intertextuality. So the Panchatantra is borrowing from a more ancient source of the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, right? And it says, Livestrong then points out, I never saw such a pack of fools. Not one was sensible. And then comes this last part of this particular Kakolukiyam, where Livestrong provides us a list of what a good king should be like. Very important is that, the king should have discerning counselors and should never trust foes, right? So, who ill-advised does not commit grave faults of savoir faire. What glutton has not much unrest within him to bear? I have experienced in person that association with the enemy is equal to the sword blade. So you cannot sleep with the enemy. And therefore, the example of that, if you sort of inculcate a relationship with your enemy, you are bound to die, is the story of the frogs that rode Snake back. So this snake who poses to be non-violent and carries the frogs on their back as penance. The snake is the natural enemy of the frog, remember, and the frogs trust him and they eat, and the snake eats them one by one, right? Or else, and then there comes another story, which is told by the snake to another snake. So another inset narrative of the butter-blinded Brahmin. And you see, once again, this is the story of the unchaste wife of the Brahmin, and who bides for his time. So he finds out that his wife is unchaste, is having an affair with another man. He bides his time, and then when the time is ripe, he finds both of them together and beats them to death. Right? So inset narrative once again comes in. But then there is this important statement about wisdom, valor, and their mutual relationship. Now, in the Kshatriya world, for example, valor is considered to be the ultimate mark of existence. That is the Kshatriya dharma, right? So valor is the ethic of battle and honest battle. But what Livestrong suggests is that valor must be combined with wisdom and guile. with wisdom and cunning. Therefore, valor in itself, the Panchatantra suggests that valor in itself is not so important. It must be tempered with wisdom. Now, can you see why people have suggested that, Vishnu Sharma was actually Chanakya? Because this is part and parcel of Kautilya's Arthashastra, Chanakya's Arthashastra, that in battle, guerrilla tactics, shrewdness, tactical retreat, and guile and cunning was acceptable. So what the Panchatantra is trying to suggest is, in times of adversity, the only dharma, the only morality that exists is that of survival. Now, in the first class, one of your classmates talked about ethics and morality, and I was discussing that, and she was a bit confused. I had promised to her that we'd come to this issue. But you see, in conventional spiritual religious morality, there's nothing called a gray area. Religion is very careful about morality. It says that whatever be the circumstances, it is a sin to steal. It is a sin to tell a lie, right? So that is the morality according to religion. But the Panchatantra offers a different kind of morality for the king and the monarch, and suggests that the first responsibility of the king is to protect his subjects and to win the battle so that this protection can exist. And therefore, guile, deception, falsehood is an acceptable part of the strategy, even breaking the laws of hospitality. So we are looking at the evolution in Panchatantra, or let me not call it evolution, the establishment of a practical morality, a Rajniti, which accepts a gray coexistence between shrewdness, cunning, falsehood, violence, a breaking of ethics in the conventional sense. That is why I'm suggesting that the ethics of the Panchatantra is unconventional. It cannot be related with the conventional morality of religious texts. And that is where you see the Panchatantra is closer to the Mahabharata. It's closer to the Mahabharata than it is to the Ramayana, because the Ramayana is much more black and white in terms of morality. The Panchatantra has this ethical gray zones that you explore in Mahabharata, right? So you can think about the ways in which the Pandavas actually killed Dronacharya. There is this entire, discourse whereby, there's a lot of guile which is used by Krishna, especially in defeating the Kauravas. Remember this entire episode where both Duryodhana and Arjun go to seek Krishna's help, and Arjun actually chooses Krishna rather than the entire, army of Krishna. So he says, "I want you, Partha." And that is another emphasis on how one single counselor of great wisdom is more important than 1,000 men of valor. And that is what Livestrong is also suggesting. So wisdom broods over the inception, memory does not fail, means appear to predilection, counsels wise prevail. Thus kingship, so who is the good king? Finally, this entire discussion of the Kakolukiyam comes down to who is the good king? What is the selfhood of the good king defined as? So prudence, capacity for self-sacrifice, and courage. Underline those sentences. Write them down once. Courage is important in a king. He should be greater in courage than his compatriots. He should be able to sacrifice himself for his subjects, right? Therefore, protecting his subjects is a supreme, endeavor. But as the, crow flies, as it were, prudence is the first requirement of the king. And if the king lacks that prudence, who is there to help him out? His counselors. Therefore, the choice of the counselor is as equally important as the choice of the king. Associate in full delight with someone who is wise. Self-sacrificing, brave, thereby win virtue as a prize. And then says, it is important, wonderful how immediate is the reward of knowing social ethics. Now you see why this term ethics comes back and forth. There's this difference that is made in the Panchatantra between moral ethics, morality, and social ethics. So the Panchatantra is not a religious book in any sense of the term. It is a very deeply political book about power, gaining power, holding on to power. So if you look at those 5 books once again, you are taking a look at how to win friends and preserve yourself, how to sort of create fissure among friends and thereby establish yourself. Kakolukiyam is about how to use guile to defeat more powerful enemies. And you have the other 2 books which talk about what not to do and how to get yourself out of crisis. Therefore, the Panchatantra is about this concept of social and I would say political ethics. Right. So Livestrong then says, first try gentle measure. Right. And then if words with actions fail to suit, checks and blocks turn into public laughing stock. So you have that old Chanakya saying, Sham Dam Danda Bhed. Right, remember? So you reward, you pay, you maintain equality, you create fissures, and if everything else fails, you Arthashastra. And remember, Arthashastra is not a book about economy, it is about politics. Rajniti, how the king should gain power and how the king should hold on to power. What is politics? Politics is that science of power, of governance. Right? Now, what is the route to welfare? Is it democracy? Is it autocracy? Should one practice transparent morality? Should one sort of put all power in one's hands? These are some of the questions, some of the very deeply political questions that the Panchatantra asks. And then he says that now, he says, never leave an enemy. All enemies must be crushed to the last person, right? So, as for my master who has overcome his foes, you can sleep soundly because there are no enemies. In houses where no snakes are found, one sleeps, right? And therefore, there is this ultimate message to the king. A king should bring his people ease. So the king should have peace. But if to have peace you need war, then make war. If to win the war you need to be immoral and untruthful, be untruthful. Take whatever means you have. the ultimate aim, the greater good, is, of course, the peace of the people. So, this is the definition of the king: love of virtue, scorn of vice, wisdom make a kingdom's prize. Then is glory proud as slave, then her plumes and pennons brave, near the white umbrella wave. So that is when the flag of the king flies high. Right. But finally, the message of Kakolukiyam is that despite having glory, this is the final message: don't exalt, because you are a slave to time. And that time and death will come when they will, and finally everything will be lost to time and death. Whenever kings anointed are, anointing jars too often spill with holy water pending ill. And he says that everybody must suffer, that there is nothing called unequivocal glory. Therefore, remember Ram wandering far. Remember Nol Damayanti, the story of Nol and Damayanti, for example, that there's nothing called unquestioned glory. There will be suffering and there will be death. Ah, where is Dasharath, who rose to heaven and dwelt its king beside? And where King Shagor, he to whom 'twas given to bind the ocean's tide? So he says that every single king will face suffering and death. That is the lot of man. Still, while you are king, you must maintain peace. And for that, whatever means you need to take, you will have to take. And therefore, the king, his counselors, his maidens gay, his golden groves, fate stings, they sink away. So this is the concept of the wheel of fortune, that destiny is most powerful, right? That human beings may strive to perfection and they may strive to be the perfect king. But the wheel of fortune is what they say almost random, that in one random point, all your gains might be lost to the whims of fate. So in that sense, the Panchatantra belongs to a world where destiny is seen to be more powerful than human free will, right? Remember these two words: destiny and human free will. When you study your classical literature in Roman and Greek, you will remember that whatever the gods decree will happen in the human world. So Sophocles' Oedipus, for example, Oedipus becomes the great king to whom his subjects come and say, you are the greatest. But little will he know that he has already killed his father and slept with his mother and has children by her. So in one cruel moment, his destiny overwhelms him. That is the classical vision of man, that man is helpless before destiny. You have King Lear, those immortal lines in King Lear: as flies to wanton boys are we to the gods. As flies manemachi to wanton boys are we to the gods. They kill us for their sport. So destiny is malignant and human beings are slaves to destiny. Still, the ethic is that till you are a king, you have to serve your people. And to serve your people, you have to do what you will. And therefore, this is how, once again, you see, finally, all the tales are brought together in that big, large tale that Vishnu Sharma has been telling his disciples, his 5 princes. Here ends book 3, called Crows and Owls, which treats, and this is very important. So what has the ultimate theme been? Peace, war, and other 4 expedients. And reconciled although he be, never trust an enemy. That's the basic moral of this entire book. Never trust an enemy. For the cave of owls was burned when the crows with fire returned. Right. So that then is the run through of the tales. Right. In our remaining classes, what we'll do is we'll talk about themes of the Panchatantra in Kakolukiyam. We'll talk about narrative strategies of the Panchatantra, and we will talk about how the text has traveled and how it is relevant in a more modern setup. Right. It is with that, therefore, that I will now stop the recording and then take your questions. Just give me a moment here.